Hi, it's Lindsay. This time I'm going to be cleaning my Hobonichi Techo cover. The Hobonichi website says they recommend dabbing the cover with a clean cloth that's been dampened with diluted neutral detergent. I've never bought neutral detergent before. I'm not really familiar with it, so I actually bought a mild detergent because it's probably a bad idea to use the most common form nowadays, I think, is the really concentrated kind where they say you can use less and less in each load, and I think that's a little too strong. So I'm going to try it out with a mild detergent and sort of diluting it with the water and using clean cloth and just seeing how it works and how much we can get off of the cover here with a year's worth of use to it, because here's the cover that I've been using for a year now, and the polyester ones, the color ones, are probably a lot easier to clean because there's no cloth that you can really damage. The cloth I would be a little more careful with. This is just an actual fabric, so while it was in my backpack and everything, over time it starts turning a little brown around the edges for rubbing on everything. You can see a little here too. So it's not much and it stands up pretty well, but after a year you do start to get those marks around the edges. So I'm going to use the detergent to try to scrub that down, and it's recommended that you sort of dab it instead of scrubbing it too hard, because then the cloth can start pilling, or it can start, you can just rubbing it a little too strong, I think, would start to ruin the fabric and the threads holding it together and everything. So I was trying to think of how to best do it, maybe with a toothbrush or things like that. But I'm going to start out with just a cloth so I can keep it gentle at first, and we'll see what happens. So the first thing I'm going to do is take everything out, obviously. So I'm going to pull the book out of here, which is huge now. This is really heavy. And this is, I'm going to pull it out the same way that I actually put it in, which is to really kind of flip the cover inside out like this, and then you don't have to worry about bending your actual paper book covers and ruining them. I probably should have taken the bookmarks out first. This will slip right out. So what can sometimes happen is I usually have mine get a little dirty on the inside, and this one, I'm not sure this will come out. That might just be ink, because I had that constantly rubbing against some washi tape. So I had some really dark black tape here, and when that was rubbing against here, that we'll see if that comes out at all. I'm not really expecting it to. So once in a while you might, depending on what you had rubbing against the interior of the cover, I'm not sure what exactly that would be considered at this point. Most of it is just the grime that built up on the edges like that. And I'm not really expecting the adhesive to come off. There's the yellow spots when I was really stuffing my cover and the zippers were getting pulled out from underneath the seam here, so that is probably going to just stay that way after it was getting tugged so much. But the black parts, I'm going to try to see if we can scrub those off. Usually if you have something stored in a pocket and it sticks out, then the part that's sticking out is going to be what's going to create these marks here, because that's causing the protrusion to be rubbing on all the grime and all the things that are pressed against it when you're carrying it around on a daily basis. It's really about experimenting and seeing what the material of your cover is, because all the covers have such different materials from each other. Hopefully, if you're seeing this video in HD, you can tell the fabric on here, and you can kind of see the really, really small threads holding it together. So this is one where if you were to scrub the fabric really hard, these small threads would start pulling up, and that's what makes it kind of gets fluffy and pilling and kind of ruined a little bit by pulling those threads apart. So the fabric, you have to be really careful. And the cover that I'm using next year, actually for my weeks, is a perfect example of a material that if I were to scrub this, if I'm cleaning it, I would probably destroy this cover, because it's just really delicate woven threads, and you really don't want to start pulling everything apart. So you just have to be a judge of what your material is on your cover. And the polyester, like the covers with the plain colors and the patterns on them, these, it's a little hard to tell on this one because it's not a solid color, but the polyester ones can take a little more than the fabric ones can, just because they don't have threads on here that would start fluffing or pulling off. So you can maybe work a little more with the polyester ones to start cleaning the edges when they get dirty around the edges here. So I would say just take it slow and start out dabbing, and I often take my finger and just start cleaning it with my finger, so I can feel that I'm not pulling any threads up and that I'm being gentle with it, and just taking one little step at a time to see if what you're doing is ruining your cover's material or not. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the towel that I'm going to use wet. Not too wet, because I don't want to soak this cover all the way through. It's going to be harder to dry. And I'm not totally sure what the material is that's underneath this. So I've got the fabric, and there's like something that's making it firmer, so it doesn't bend and it gives it structure. I'm not totally sure what's under there, so I don't want to get it too wet, just in case that's maybe paper based or something underneath there and gets distorted. So I'm going to try to keep my towel as damp as I can. After I get a bunch on here, I'm going to dilute it a little more in the water. But I'm going to try not to get it too soapy, because the soapier this is, the harder it's going to be to rinse it out of my cover fabric. And I want to be able to rinse it out, because if you have any soap or suds left over in there and it's not rinsed out, I think it gets even dirtier that way, because that dried up soap can actually start collecting the grime on everything and sort of pulling it in like a sponge. Okay, so I've got the diluted part here, and just start rubbing it really gently. Like I said, don't scrub it too much, or you're going to start ruining the fabric. I do have a spot here that's from a pen mark. And anything that comes from just a flat out pen, I'm not really expecting to come off very well, just because ink is so permanent. So I'm just kind of pressing it in and dabbing it instead of scrubbing it. As I've been working on my really old cover, the one that was really dirty, I've found that the best method I've had is to put the soap directly in my finger and lather it into the fabric after kind of getting the fabric wet. And by using my finger, I can be a little more, have more controlled movements, and know that I'm not scrubbing it too hard or pressing down too hard. So I've been using my finger to work it into a lather, and then using the clean, damp cloth to start wiping it away by dabbing it a little bit. Pushing down a little hard, but not scrubbing it. After the cover has been scrubbed down, you're going to want to take your wash rag and completely rinse it out so that you don't have any soap left at all in it, or you could just take a fresh rag and get that wet so you make sure that there's no soap left. So you take the rinsed rag and it's damp, and you just sort of take all the spots that you had spot cleaned and just dab it one more time to just start getting some of the soap out and rinsing it out without getting it too wet. I'm also rinsing out the rag several times in the sink just to make sure I'm not picking up soap, leaving it in here, and then just spreading it more. So it's probably a good idea if you did do a lot of cleaning to just keep rinsing it out once in a while after you rub down a few places. The longer you use a cover, the more over time you're going to have things rubbing up against it that aren't entirely washable, and that goes the same for any fabric at all. So there will be some things like such as the pen mark, and ink is usually pretty permanent, and just some of the little marks you'll get on there can't totally come off just because of what it is that had rubbed up against it. Sometimes, like this washi tape that had been rubbing up against it, it is better than it used to be, and it's not back to new like when I had bought it, but it is a good improvement. So it is worth it to wash it maybe once a year, not too much. It is really tedious, but depending on the kind of cover you have. So it can, and you can usually see the difference of how much cleaner it is after it dries too. This isn't entirely dry yet. So when you're drying your cover, you don't want to put a hair dryer or anything on it, because anything that's really hot like that can start shrinking the fabric, and that's the same reason you wouldn't want to put it in the laundry machine or anything like that, where the rougher you are on it with extreme temperatures and extreme rubbing and anything like that, it's going to start distorting it based on the material, and especially because there's just a specific size cut out here. So if there's any shrinkage, you might get some wrinkles, or it just might not look very good. So you do want to air dry it, again, not in the sun so it doesn't fade or get too hot or anything like that. So you air dry it in the shade. Indoors might be a good idea. Something else to be really careful about is when you have a cover that is half fabric and half leather. This is a cover that has real leather inside of it, and leather you don't want to get wet. You have to use a special leather cleaner to clean leather covers. So I would say when cleaning these covers, you just have to be really careful that you're dabbing it and just sticking to these sides and not hitting that wet rag onto the leather. When I was cleaning my big one, it was starting to seep into the leather, and you can actually see where the leather started to get wet. So there you go. I hope you have good luck with your cover and that you're not scared to let it look a little used and loved. And if you have any questions or requests for other topics, let me know in the comments.